Hey there friends, Andrea Walford here from Make Beautiful Cards. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this Happy For You card featuring Stampin' Up's Butterfly Bijou 6x6 patterned paper and the Pretty Perennials stamp set. So the first thing that we need to do is to prep our butterflies. And I'm going to be using this patterned paper sheet that you see here from the Butterfly Bijou 6x6 Designer Series paper pack. Now there's two ways that you can cut out your butterflies. You can do it by hand using scissors like you see here. And if you're going to do that, then I suggest you watch my YouTube video, How to Fussy Cut Like a Pro, because it shares all sorts of tips and tricks for getting great results with your fussy cutting. Your other option, if you like to do a lot of fussy cutting like I do, is to use a machine like the Brother Scan & Cut. And this is a machine that I recently invested in because I do a huge amount of fussy cutting on my cards, and I have for years. So it just made sense for me to take the next step and invest in the machine. Now, because I have the machine to do the cutting for me, like it can cut out all the butterflies on this sheet in about a minute. In terms of setting up the machine, it maybe takes me 2 to 3 minutes total from start to finish. So because of that, I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to cut out all the whole butterflies on each pattern paper sheet here. So you can see here, there's 6 butterflies that I can cut out. And then that way I just set them aside and I can use them in making a whole bunch of cards. And I don't have to do this step every single time I want to sit down and make a card. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to cut these out, and then once I've done that, I'll be back to show you what they look like. So I'm back from my cutting machine and you can see all my butterflies. Now the one that I'm going to be using for this card is the butterfly that you see here. Next I'm going to prep my happy greeting. So I'm going to be using the Pretty Perennial stamp set and I'm going to be using this greeting that says happy. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp it onto black cardstock using Whisper White craft ink, and then I'm going to heat emboss it using white embossing powder. Now, what I like to do is, because I'm planning on making a lot of cards using this happy greeting, I like to save myself some time by stamping, embossing, and cutting a bunch of these images out at the same time. So I'm just going to show you how I do that. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my embossing powder tool. So I'm then going to take my embossing powder tool and I'm going to rub it all over my cardstock piece. Now I can only stamp a certain number of greetings at the same time and emboss them. I can't actually do the entire sheet simply because I don't want the ink to dry before I'm able to stick the embossing powder. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work as quickly as I can, and I'm going to stamp 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see if I can get away with stamping 6, 5, 6. And I'm going to place this over a coffee filter, and I'm going to sprinkle on embossing powder. So let's start with the right hand side first, and then I'll slide this over and we'll do the left hand side. And then I'm carefully going to flick the back, and you can see if you do a good job applying your embossing powder tool all over, then you'll have minimal flecks to clean up afterwards. So here you can see I was able to go ahead and stamp 6 of these. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my heat tool and I'm going to heat emboss all of them. So here you can see what my heat embossed pieces look like. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim off my excess cardstock here. And I'm going to go ahead and cut these out. Now, up until recently, I would have cut these out using my paper snips and I would have done it by hand. And if you're fussy cutting by hand, then I recommend you watch my How to Fussy Cut Like a Pro video on YouTube, because it shares some tips and tricks for getting great results with fussy cutting. Now recently, I treated myself to a Brother Scan & Cut. It's an electronic cutting machine, and it will actually cut these out for me, leaving a nice small border around it. So it makes cutting out lots of these images really quick, which is why I've actually gone ahead and stamped so many of them. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to cut these out, and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like. So here you can see what all my die cut pieces look like. So I'm going to set aside the one that I'm going to be using for this card, and then I'll put the others aside for other projects that I will be creating. So I'm now going to prepare the greeting that I'm going to be pairing with the word happy. Once again, I'm using the Pretty Perennials stamp set, and I'm going to stamp 3 greetings because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm prepping for a bunch of different cards, so I figured I might as well stamp them all at once, and I'll show you how I do that. So I'm going to be using the greeting birthday, for you, and you make me. So my strip of black cardstock is secured to my grid paper using a repositionable adhesive just so it doesn't shift as I'm stamping. I'm taking my embossing powder tool, I'm patting it liberally all over my cardstock piece, and then once you've done that, you don't want to touch your cardstock anymore. So I'm now going to grab my white craft ink pad and my greetings. So I'm trying to align them fairly close to the bottom of my cardstock piece. So I've stamped the greeting birthday twice, I've stamped the for you twice, and the you make me. So now I'm going to grab my coffee filter, and I'm going to sprinkle on embossing powder on all my greetings. So there you can see how that looks. Now it looks like one of my for you has a lot of embossing powder. It's going to be challenging to clean that off. So what I'm going to do is I'm very quickly going to stamp another for you and maybe another birthday. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to emboss all of those. Now if you do have any stray flecks of embossing powder, you can try to get rid of them with a little paintbrush, but that should be good. So I'm going to heat emboss these now, and I will be back to show you what it looks like when they're done. So here you can see what all my greetings look like. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this apart. So I'm going to place it on my guillotine style trimmer, and I want to cut it right down the middle of this piece. And then I'm going to trim each individual word separately. Then what I like to do before I actually start the trimming process is I like to just cut them apart. So once you have all your pieces cut apart, you can then start trimming them. Now to help me get an even straight trim around, I always use my little guillotine trimmer. This Tonic Studios one, this small size one, is a great size for this. And I use the edge of the plastic guide to help me figure out where I'm going to cut. So what I make sure is that my letters, I can just see the very tip of my letters past the edge of the plastic guide. So I start with the side usually. So I align the top edge of my strip onto or with one of the lines on my platform. Then I make sure the letter is either just aligned with that plastic, with the edge of that plastic guide, or sticking out slightly. It's a little bit fidgety, of course, because the paper ends up pretty much being completely covered by the plastic guide. But I always get great results doing it like this. So I'll do the sides first, then I'll flip this. Now just the one trick when you're doing this, in addition to using your plastic guide to align it, is that the paper can slip easily. So you really want to make sure that you're holding on to the plastic guide just on top of where the paper is. And of course you keep your fingers out of the way of the blade. So there you can see I have a perfectly trimmed greeting. So now I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to trim the rest of my greetings, and then I'll be back to show you what they look like. So here you can see I've trimmed all my greetings, and I discarded the ones that didn't have a nice clean stamped impression. So now the greeting that I'm going to be using for this card is this For You greeting. So now I have here a 4 by 5¼ inch piece of white cardstock. And what I want to do now is use my blending brush and my Pool Party ink to add just a soft sponging in the center of this panel. So I'm going to pounce on my ink pad, and then I'm going to tap off onto my grid paper, and then I'm very lightly going to start sponging in a circular motion, or ink blending in a circular motion, starting at the center of my cardstock panel where I know it's going to be hidden by the butterfly in case I get a blob of ink. And then I'm just bringing the color out softly. Now, if you make sure that when your blending brush first touches the paper, you don't press down super firmly, you shouldn't get any ink smears or blobs or discolorations. You should just get a nice smooth blend. So what you're going to do is you're basically just going to keep layering on ink until you get it to the depth that you're looking for. And I just really want it to be soft and subtle, like so. So let's just place our butterfly here just to make sure that enough of the blue shows up. And you can see, although I do see some of the blue, it's not that noticeable. So I think I want to layer it a little bit more in this section here. So I'm just going to concentrate my blending right over here. And then let's just bring a little bit more blending a little bit higher. So you can see that each time I'm bringing my butterfly in as reference so I can make sure that the blending shows up behind the butterfly. So that's probably good. So now I'm going to grab some ribbon that I have. So I have, this here is fine art ribbon, and this is from the January to June 2021 mini catalog. And then I have this ribbon, I think this is mint macaron, and this came in the 2020 mini catalog. It was the end of the year catalog, the one that ended, I guess, at the very beginning of January 4th. So it's now retired, but you can look for any other color ribbon that basically matches whatever the color of butterfly you're using. Or if you don't have a matching color, like if you didn't have a green, then you could always use 2 different types of gold ribbon, for example, if you had it, or a neutral ribbon, and then a ribbon with this metallic gold. So you have some options as to what you can do, or you can use pattern paper. But I like the extra texture of ribbon, so I'm going to cut a piece that is, let me just measure it with my grid paper here, it's about 6 inches. So I want a 6-inch piece of this green ribbon, and then I'd like the same thing of this ribbon here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the ends of my ribbon on an angle using my fabric scissors. Then I'm going to take my double-sided adhesive, and I'm going to very carefully place some at the back of my ribbon. Not all the way to the end though. And then I want to stick one ribbon so that it's angled downwards. And then I'm going to take my other ribbon, and I'm also going to place some adhesive at the back. And then I'm going to stick this ribbon down, but I'm going to angle it in the other direction. However, as you can see, I want them to be fairly connected here at the end. And then if you need to, because this is a fairly fragile ribbon, you can always just clean up the edges. And you can also potentially carefully lift the end of the ribbon and just place a little bit of adhesive underneath. like so. So now I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to secure the ribbon. And if you want to, you could also use a little bit of tape just to really make sure it's held down. So now for my butterfly, I'm going to grab some Stampin' Dimensionals and I'm going to place them at the back. I'm going to place one at the center and then one at the corner of each wing segment. And then you can see I've gone ahead and stuck my butterfly down. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to stick down the word happy. Now the H and the A are going to sit on the butterfly, but the two P's and the Y are going to extend beyond it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some Stampin' Dimensionals. So I'm going to place a Stampin' Dimensional at the back of the tail of the Y, one at the back of each of the P's, and then I also want to cut just a little strip of this and then two segments which I'm going to place at the back of the tail of each P. See, and the reason that I use black is because whenever I'm working with black cardstock, if you use black Stampin' Dimensional, it doesn't show from the side. So now I'm just going to remove the backing from my Stampin' Dimensionals. And then I'm going to take my double-sided adhesive. Could use liquid glue as well. I'm going to place a little bit on the back of the P and on the A. And then I want to stick this down, making sure it's straight, like so. And then the For You, I'm just going to place some double-sided adhesive at the back. And I want to tuck it so that it's slightly underneath the edge of the P. And then before you press it down all the way though, you do want to make sure that it's straight. So now I'm going to take my card front, and this is my card, it's a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card, and I'm going to center my panel onto my note card. Once I'm happy with its placement, I'm just going to lift up the edge of one side, press that down, and then lift up the other side. Press that down. And then now I'm going to grab some rhinestones and I'm going to place a large and two small. To the left of the greeting, like so. And then I'm going to take a medium rhinestone and two small rhinestones and create a little cluster above the greeting like so. So there you have it, friends. There you can see what our card looks like, and it's now finished.